Welcome to the 8th Line Mountain Studio video tutorial. This tutorial is dedicated to looking at what sound synthesis is and how we use it to make great synth sounds in our music. And we're going to be using Ableton Live's native synthesizer operator as our main example. Okay, so just to revisit, when we want a sound, preset or not, we drag a synthesizer from the device browser here on the left. If you want a preset sound, then it's a good idea to open up the folders here by clicking on the triangles, and then you can search for something that roughly describes what you're after. Here I'm navigating through the operator presets, and I'll try out this lead dirty silicon one. So I'm just checking that the record arm button is red, which means that I have MIDI input, and then I can go. If you don't want to use the preset option, then you have to kind of search back up through this directory to that top level one that we went inside, and it's kind of the mothership. It's got the name of the synthesizer itself on it, in this case operator. So when we drag that one across, we'll find that it doesn't have a preset inside, and it's been left in its most basic or most neutral state. Let's have a listen to that. Okay, so that's quite boring, but it's probably good for learning the nuts and the bolts. So synthesizers can be kind of famous for all looking very different, having different controls and different capabilities. But the basic things are all the same because it's about science, acoustics and electronics. So let's have a quick visit to our theory whiteboard again. When a speaker moves back and forth, it draws a shape. The shape that it draws in space depends on the sound that it's making. This is a smooth sound. The shape is similarly smooth. And here are some sharper sounds whose shapes are similarly sharper. To really get a feel for this, let's look briefly at Amanda Gassay's video. She has a machine that visualizes these shapes that we call waveforms because they describe the form of sound waves. So note that Amanda is changing the waveform settings on her synthesizer, and as she's doing so, the machine is showing how the waveform looks different. Waveform is one important part of making a sound, but it's only the first step. A basic summary of sound synthesis can be explained in this diagram. Okay, so we've already looked at waveform. That's the initial shape that you choose. Filters are the second point. A filter on a sound can change the color or the tone. There are lots of different sorts of filters used to get different colors. Some examples are low pass, and they let all of the lower parts of the sound pass through the filter and they discard the high. Then there's the high pass, that's the opposite. And then the band pass, they let a certain group of frequencies within the sound pass through. And there are many more. Control signals are all about changing the sound over time. So far we've been able to choose a certain sound quality by picking a waveform and then applying a filter, but it's just at a constant volume like this. It's a bit flat and it's not very exciting. So this is where LFOs and envelopes come in. LFO stands for low frequency oscillator, and it's actually yet another waveform, but it's so low in pitch that we can't even hear it. It's best to understand LFOs by listening to examples. The LFO just goes back and forth like any old waveform, affecting your original sound in a particular way. You can apply it to volume or to pitch. You can speed it up or slow it down. You can even apply it to the filter, so it increases or decreases the effect of the filter. Then there are envelopes, and they have nothing to do with posting letters. It's best to think about envelopes as something that changes over time, like an LFO, but it doesn't go back and forth. It only happens once. So this is our sound so far. Its volume stays the same the whole time, and we could visualize that by drawing this graph. This is time and this is volume. Now this is the same sound with this envelope applied to the volume. It starts loud and then very quickly becomes a bit softer. So an envelope is very important. It can make the difference between a piano sound and a saxophone sound, for example. And for this reason, envelopes are most famous for controlling volume. Yet like an LFO, they can control any number of things. And so in the real world, a MIDI keyboard would probably sit at the beginning of this somewhere, and then at the end, after some matter of fuss, we'd have a speaker. And that's a super abstracted explanation of synthesis. Wow! Now that we know how it works, we can start learning about specific synthesizer interfaces. Back here in Operator, I've got lots of fancy extras to play with, but the nuts and the bolts that we just spoke about are all here. That's waveform there. That's filter. That's my LFO. And that's an envelope. See how much control we have already? One thing worth pointing out is how this operator interface works. Like I said, each synthesizer is usually set out quite differently. In this case, there are 4 sounds playing at once, 4 sound producing modules, and they interact in certain ways. They are represented by these 4 boxes on the left. I can turn them up in volume and hear how they're interacting with each other. Now when I click on each of the sound producing modules here on the left, this center area allows me to change the envelope and waveform of each of them respectively. Note that when we click on LFO or filter, the center screen allows me to change certain things about them too. All of these sounds with their own individual envelopes then move together into the LFO and filter and finally out through these master controls. Okay, so now let's make a cool electronic sound from the ground up. Just think about this as one kind of practical example of which areas in this synthesizer are worth fiddling with and exploring more. There is so much more that the machine can do that I'm not covering because we just don't have the airtime, but it's a good exercise to look at how to build something from the ground up. So we'll just start here with 2 sound producing modules because we're only beginners, and I'll just turn off the top 2 by clicking there on the letters and they go grey, which usually means off. That's good. Now first notice that we've got 2 sine waves here interacting. That's the first sound module, that's a sine, and that's the second. That's our first problem right there. A sine modulating a sine sometimes is just pure boring. So let's change the second one to something like, let's say, a saw wave, and now play that. We're already getting a bit better. Maybe I'll change the envelope of that second one also. So let's keep its attack fast and high, but really bring it down all the way down just after that. Okay, so you can hear that. I'm just going to make that decay last even a little bit longer, which is cool because you really get that slow change over time now. See there, it's changing over 5 seconds to 8 seconds. That's good because I want this sound to be slow and heavy maybe. Okay, so let's filter a bit to get the best parts of this sound coming through better. I might put on I've got to choose my filter type here. I'll put on a low pass so it's a bit bassier, and then I'm just going to fiddle ignorantly with the other controls until I find something that I like. That's a great way to start with filters. And that's alright, that's sounding alright, but it's a little bit flat. I might try adding an LFO to the filter. So I don't want the LFO to affect any of the sound producing modules. When I click on the LFO there, I can turn off all of the other modules and make sure that destination A is going to the filter FIL. I can choose a second destination there too, so I can apply it also somewhere else, and I might send that to the amount of the LFO itself, so just to really make sure that there's a lot of changes constantly happening in my sound and make it really active. And that's pretty good. Let's add a bit of distortion. I'm just gonna drag in something from the left there, devices. And now I'm getting towards B. An alternative approach to using our newfound knowledge of sound synthesis is to grab a preset sound and improve it and customize it. So now that we know what these things do within Operator, if we drag in one of their presets, we can make it even better. So let's say you want to have a bass, synth bass. Let's say for some reason you drag in an acid bass acid. Okay, so what do you want to do? That's a bit harsh, that kind of sound. Where's that coming from? Let's take the filter off. Yeah, okay, so it's something to do with the filter. Maybe we don't want to take it off completely. Maybe we just want to change the way it's being filtered. So when I click on filter now, I can see there's actually an envelope on top of my filter here. I bet you anything if I change that. Yeah, that changes the way it's being filtered. So we've made that a little less harsh now. And I want to reverse it a bit, give it a slow attack instead. Slower. Okay, now let's say we want, when I take my finger off the key, it stops really abruptly like that. And nothing. What if I want a little bit of a decay, like a little bit of a ring out after that? So now I'm going to go into the sound modules, and that's called release, the part of the envelope that happens once you take your finger off the key. At the moment, this is on 1.6 milliseconds, which is nothing. So I'm just going to drag that up to a couple of seconds, or maybe like 1.5. I'll do it to both sound producing or sound modulating oscillators there on the left. 1.5, yeah, more or less. That's a bit better. Well, let's say that's what I wanted. That's a bit better. Now, the only other thing is there's no LFO because the amount is on 0, so let's introduce a bit of that, a bit of a wobble. Turn it all the way up. Let's put it on low. What is the LFO affecting? It's affecting D, and that's why we're not hearing anything, because there's nothing on D. Let's instead put the LFO on the filter. Yeah, that's a bit more like it. Okay, so let's take it down on the amount to make that a bit more subtle. So that's an example of using a preset and then modifying it. Again, there's so many things that you can do with synthesis. It doesn't really make sense to go through how to make A or how to make B, because we'd be here forever. But hopefully this introduction to the theory of synthesis and the following examples are enough to get you started fiddling, exploring without being too overwhelmed. With practice comes intuition, and you'll find yourself getting more comfortable with having a direction to head towards when making your own sounds. When you feel like you've mastered the basic elements of waveform, filters, LFO and envelopes, try looking into some exciting other things that are important, like synthesis algorithms, looping envelopes, and using multiple LFOs to affect each other. Now that we've covered making beats and synth lines in this tutorial series, our next video tutorial will be looking at how to build all of these elements into a song using the arranging powers within Ableton Live. Stay tuned.